Joe Biden is scheduled to give his first campaign speech for 2024 on Saturday in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. But as he does, reports are starting to come out that campaign staffers and volunteers are quitting in very large numbers. Why is this happening, and what does it mean for Joe Biden's reelection chances in 2024? Hang on, folks. We're going to get into all this in just 1 second.
My name is Brian Trippett. I am your front porch conservative. Step on up to my electronic front porch and let's talk.
On Saturday, January 6, 2024, Joe Biden will travel to Valley Forge, Pennsylvania to give his first campaign speech for his re-election bid in 2024. But as he does so, reports are surfacing that large numbers of his campaign staff, or I should say more particularly volunteers, and even some members of the functioning government right now are resigning over his leadership regarding the Israeli-Hamas war. So let's take a look at the articles that we found, talk about this, and what it all means. We'll start with Newsweek.com, and we read the following. Headline: Joe Biden campaign volunteers are dropping out in droves. Article written by Caitlin Lewis, we read the following. A group of staffers working on Joe Biden's re-election campaign warned the president that his volunteers are quitting, quote, in droves over his handling of Israel's military response in the Gaza Strip. Biden has faced immense pressure from members of his own party over the United States policies in light of the surprise Hamas attacks on Israel on October 7th, which killed about 1,200 people and resulted in roughly 240 hostages, including some Americans. In response, Israel launched an extensive air and ground offensive in Gaza, killing nearly 22,000 Palestinians over the past weeks, according to Gaza health officials cited by the Associated Press. In a letter published Wednesday on Medium, an anonymous group of Biden campaign staffers demand the president call for a ceasefire in Gaza, citing concerns that not shifting his policy on the issue could hurt his 2024 chances. And we will now go to that letter. This is on Medium.com. Dear President Biden, we write to you as the current staff of your re-election campaign. As we work to mobilize voters to cast their ballots for you in 2024, we must take a moment to acknowledge our tremendous grief and the grief shared by countless other Americans toward the violence occurring in Gaza. We join this campaign because the values that you and we share are ones worth fighting for. Justice, empathy, and our belief in the dignity of human life is the backbone not only of the Democratic Party, but of the country. However, your administration's response to Israel's indiscriminate bombing in Gaza has been fundamentally antithetical to those values, and we now believe could cost you the 2024 election. Therefore, we join your 2020 campaign alumni in imploring you to, number one, publicly call for and use financial and diplomatic leverage to bring about an immediate permanent ceasefire. Number two, advocate for de-escalation in the region, including demanding that Hamas release all hostages and that Israel release over 2,000 Palestinians in administrative detention being held without charge. Number three, end unconditional military aid to Israel. Number four, investigate Israel's actions in Gaza if they violate the Leahy Law, prohibiting U.S. military aid from funding foreign military units implicated in the commission of gross violations of human rights. Number five, take concrete steps to end the conditions of apartheid, occupation, and ethnic cleansing that are the root cause of this conflict. Like so many others, we continue to be devastated by Hamas's attacks against Israeli civilians on October 7th. It was a vile assault, one that touched the consciousness of the country. The subsequent killing of 20,000 Palestinian civilians, however, has struck the same societal nerve. We cannot repeat the mistakes of the past by allowing the actions of Hamas to justify further violence against civilians. Israel's attacks in Gaza have had one of the highest civilian death tolls of any conflict in decades. Children have been caught in the center of it, and many of them killed by bombs made in St. Charles, Missouri. In the past 88 days, over 1% of the population of Gaza, including countless women, children, and premature babies, have been killed, while almost 1.9 million Palestinians have been displaced from their homes. There is no safe place for innocent civilians to go, no shelter, and no humanitarian assistance. What we are witnessing in Gaza, as highlighted by countless experts from around the world, is a genocide. Going further into the letter, Biden for president staff have seen volunteers quit in droves, and people who have voted blue for decades feel uncertain about doing so for the first time ever because of this conflict. It is not enough to merely be the alternative to Donald Trump. The campaign has to shift the feeling in the pits of voters' stomachs, the same feeling that weighs on us every day as we fight for your reelection. The only way to do that is to call for a ceasefire. This administration's profound sense of empathy is one of the reasons we felt inspired to join your reelection campaign. Now, we have faith that you will listen to 2/3 of the country and 3/4 of our fellow Democrats to support a ceasefire. Complicity in the death of over 20,000 Palestinians, 8,200 of whom are children, simply cannot be justified. Only with an end to violence can we achieve a real and lasting peace that upholds the rights of self-determination, safety, and freedom for Palestinians and Israelis alike. Sincerely, 17 Biden for President staffers. That's a pretty significant letter, all things considered. Now, I want to go back to a couple other things about that article from Newsweek and point them out to you. Then we're going to go to one other piece that I found. Then we're going to talk about what all this means. So we return once again to the article at Newsweek.com. We'll read a little bit more in there. Campaigns cited a recent poll published by the New York Times, which found that a majority of Democrats, 64%, believe that Israel should stop its military campaign in order to protect against civilian casualties, even if Hamas has not been fully eliminated. The same survey, which was published in mid-December and was based on responses of 1,016 registered voters nationwide, found that 72% of voters under the age of 30 disapproved of Biden's handling of the conflict, which the letter noted is a traditionally key Democrat voting bloc. Reading a little bit further, we find the following. The staffer's letter comes on the same day that a U.S. Department of Energy policy advisor told the Associated Press that they submitted their resignation in protest over the president's handling of the war. Tariq Habash, who was appointed by the Biden administration, told the outlet that he had submitted his resignation after what had been, quote, after he had done everything imaginable to register his objection to the administration leaders within the systems in place. According to the Associated Press, Habash is the second known Biden official to resign in protest. Josh Paul, former director of congressional and public affairs for the State Department's Bureau of Political Military Affairs, resigned in October when the president ordered the acceleration of arms transfers to Israel. And finally, despite the pushback, a poll conducted exclusively for Newsweek by Redfield and Wilton Strategies in mid-December found that support for the president's response to the Israel-Hamas war had increased among young voters, up by 5 percentage points when compared to a similar poll conducted in October. Okay, now lest you think that this is one letter and this is 17 campaign staffers who are not happy, or one member or two members of the Biden administration, lower-level functionaries, who are upset about this, let me show you an article from Politico, and I think you're going to understand just how deep this goes. So, folks, I ask you to take a look at the following. Biden campaign staff issue anonymous letter protesting approach to Israel-Hamas war. Letter says it is moral imperative for the president to publicly call for a cessation of violence. I'm going to go a little bit further into this article written by Ben Johansson and let you see what we're talking about here. This is rather amazing, all things considered. The letter is the latest example, and it refers to the same one that we read on Medium.com, of the internal rifts not just within the Democratic Party, but within the Biden operation of how to approach this conflict. Since the fall, a flurry of protest letters, often written without names attached, have urged the president to support a ceasefire. In November, 500 political appointees and staff members from 40 government agencies anonymously signed one letter, while another letter included the names of over 500 alumni of Biden's 2020 presidential campaign. White House interns also sent a letter to the president, and staffers on Capitol Hill have sent similar letters to their bosses. Biden supporters have raised questions about the veracity of those numbers, noting that the anonymity make it impossible to confirm. A campaign official said they could not comment on the letter as they had not received it, but they added, when it comes to President Biden's position, he's been unequivocal. Israel has a right and an obligation to defend its people after the October 7th terrorist attack. He also knows the importance of earning the trust of every community, which is why he is working closely and proudly with leaders in the Jewish, Muslim, and Palestinian communities in America, the official said. Okay, let's talk about this. Going back to the earliest days of the American Republic, it is not unusual for cabinet members to disagree with one another over how best to implement a president's policy position. I mean, for example, off the top of my head, I can think of the great debates that took place between Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton. But to my recollection, I don't know that I have ever heard of anything quite like this, where functioning members of an administration, and granted, we're not talking about cabinet secretaries or something along those lines, we're talking about mid-level staffers, where mid-level staffers in a functioning administration and campaign staffers and campaign volunteers are quitting left and right over the question of how the president is handling a foreign affairs question. Now, we're not, as I said, we're not talking about high-level named people, but we're talking about people that are the heart and soul and the blood and sinew of not just the administration, but also Biden's reelection efforts. So, what does all this mean in the long run? Well, it does do one thing, if nothing else. It points out just how deeply divided the Democrat Party is on the question of the Israeli-Hamas conflict. I mean, to my recollection, the last thing that I can remember historically that comes close to this would have been the tensions in the country in the Vietnam War, and especially in the Democrat Party, which boiled over at the 1968 convention in Chicago, Illinois. What does all this mean for Biden in the long run politically? Well, if these troubles continue for Biden by October and November, as they do right now, he's going to have significant problems with the young voter bloc that normally is a solid base for the Democrat Party. He's going to have trouble in the Palestinian community, and he's going to have trouble in the Jewish community. Right now, Joe Biden is taking a position that nobody inside his party is really happy with, except for maybe a small minority, which is still powerful, but it's not as big a contingent as it used to be. For my part, I think Joe Biden is taking the absolutely correct position, that Israel has the right to defend itself as it was attacked without provocation. Much that I would say the same position that the United States had after 9/11. Now, granted, a lot of what's going on in the Middle East right now is fueled by decades, centuries, and thousands of years of tension. I'm not going to say that 9/11 and what happened on October 7th are the exact same thing, but what I am saying is nations have the right to defend themselves when they are attacked without provocation. So for that position that Joe Biden is taking, for my part, I agree with him. But how he handles this in the long run inside his own party could very well go a long way to be one of the factors that cost him re-election if he does go on to lose. So we're going to keep an eye on this. Like I said, I've never heard of something like this, where mid-level administration officials and campaign staffers and volunteers are quitting just because the president takes a particular position over a foreign policy question. This is something pretty unique, but that's what I think about it. What do you think? As we start to wrap up this video, please do me some favors as always. Number one, if you are not a subscriber to my channel, please do so. Number two, please leave a comment below. I would love to know what you think about all this. Number three, please share the video around. I am a one-man band, and I'll take all the help I can get. Number four, please hit the bell for notifications. I want to make sure you're always aware when new materials are coming out. And finally, please give me a thumbs up. My name is Brian Trippett. I am your Front Porch Conservative, and I will see you next time.